Okay, looking good. Welcome, welcome. Alrighty. Well, it started. I feel like that fan might be too loud, but it doesn't seem to be getting picked up. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it's hanging around like... Eh. Almost there. There we go. Okay. Let's see how bad that is. I wasn't talking very loud, so... Woof. Yeah, I mean, it's hanging around like... I was talking pretty quiet there, but... I don't know. Just don't know. Let's turn it down a bit. Oh, that seems way better. Way better. This is me talking at a more normal volume that I'd record in. Let's see how this sounds. Oh, that looks good. This is me talking at a more normal volume that I'd record in. Let's see how this sounds. Yeah, not too bad. Should be able to clean that up, no problem. Okay. Oh, no, I don't want to delete that again. I don't want to resize the stupid thing. Ba-ba. All right. Yeah, I wasn't really able to record all last week because work got pretty crazy, so getting back into it. Here we go. Does it start from... Oh, it starts from the current. There. Arc 18, Radiation, Chapter 10. I waited, impatient. I'd taken 20 minutes to get my costume together, made use of the tools that were still in Rain's old room to file off the oh my goodness. Yeah. File off the most abraded parts of my armor. Abraded. Not a word you see every day. I'd taken 20 minutes to get my costume together, made use of the tools that were still in Rain's old room to file off the most abraded parts of my armor, and broke off one tine of the decorative arrangement at my left shoulder while trying to straighten it. Hair brushed and fixed up, costume brushed with an animal grooming brush to get the grit out. The phone remained silent. Rain sat in the living room, off to the side of the front hall, curled up in a chair, his head bent. With his mask, it wasn't possible to read his expression, but I was assuming his eyes were closed. Meditating, to try to improve his focus and fine-tune his self-image so he might be better equipped while dreaming. Kenzie was in the kitchen, tinkering at the dinner table. Sveta, Byron, Chastity, and I stood in the hall, tense. "Will you accept it if they say no?" Sveta asked me. "I have to," I said. "It has a lot of problems. It requires a lot. People are going to die. And I think I could make peace with being pissed at the wardens for not accepting my plan, while being relieved those deaths won't be on my head." "Might be easier said than done," Byron said. He sat on the stairs, wearing scuffed chainmail, helmet off. "Easier said than done, agreed." "Time is running out," Natalie observed. "I'm not sure what I'm hoping for at this point." "Me either," I admitted.
"Sveta!"
Kenzie called out. She dogged over from the kitchen.
"Here. If it's lame, you can turn it off. There's a few settings, but if you wear it over your heart, it'll read your heart rate and adjust accordingly."
Sveta took the pin, which looked like something between a conch shell, a tree, and a fish, a spiral with branches coming off of it, the tail extended. She fixed it to the breast of her costume, then activated it. Kenzie was already handing Byron one. Sveta wore pieces of her prosthetic suit, armor that featured decorative curls and waves, and she'd put it on over her coat, mostly because she didn't have another coat that really fit with the costume. I'd offered her some of mine, but just about everything I and Crystal had clashed. With the pin's activation, her coat took on a new texture, the patchwork pattern fading away, replaced with a mosaic of images that matched with the curl of her armor and the colors of the coat. They drifted, shifted, and moved with watercolor blurs. The lines between coat and armor disappeared. Byron had one too. It stuck to his chest with a magnet, and Kenzie pointed out where to put a clip so it would attach to a bit of plating as well, so it wouldn't fall off. A similar, shifting texture, but it looked like the play of light off of rippling water, reflected on the brighter parts of his costume, while the rest was left cast into shadow.
"Cool,"
he said.
"Isn't it? I tried to use what I studied about your phase shifting with Tristan. If you'll change?"
Byron blurred. Tristan emerged. The pin was preserved. No visual effect, though.
"Crap,"
Kenzie said.
"You do realize that preserving details across this change is the real accomplishment?"
Tristan asked.
"But it's not... Oh, there we go."
The red parts of the armor took on a bit of an ember glow.
"If you can make stuff stay when we change, we could really use that," Tristan said. "That's what's really impressing me here."
"It was an experiment, and it worked. So, awesome,"
Kenzie said, excited.
"And I like the visual effect."
"I do too, thank you, but..."
She was already leaving the hallway, running over to Rain. He broke from his meditation to take the token.
"But I guess I'll bug you about it later,"
Tristan said, to the spot she'd just occupied. Rain's thing worked. It didn't exaggerate the silver cracks that spread along the dark metal portions of his costume and tinkerings, but did make the white fabric portions of his hood and general costume brighter in the dark. She bounced twice on the spot before turning, excited, to me. "Thank you," I said as I took the device. It matched the spiked crest at the top of my armor. "I always get anxious when my appearance isn't perfect before I go out." Oh, no, that's Kenzie. Said as I took the device. It matched the spiked crest at the top of my armor.
"I always get anxious when my appearance isn't perfect before I go out. I'm working on it, but, Natalie knows."
"Yeah, I know," I said. Kenzie wasn't the kind of kid who could throw on any clothes off the floor of her room and go out for a quick breakfast. Shower, clothes crisp, not a hair out of place, and then the projection, which removed anything she'd missed and provided a second layer of defense. I'd coaxed her into not stressing about it a few times when she'd stayed overnight this past week, but it was hard. Especially because I did a very similar thing with my wardrobe choices. I didn't insist on having my shirts ironed or fuss about a single stray thread, but I did go to darker places than Kenzie did when I got too self-conscious. My device gave the gold parts of my costume an intermittent glow, like stumbling too much. My mouth's drying out. Okay. But I did go to darker places than Kenzie did when I got too self-conscious. My device gave the gold parts of my costume an intermittent glow, like sunlight from an out-of-sight source was falling on it. There were a few parts where the armor was damaged, like the broken tine at the shoulder, that the light bled out, but that almost made it better. "Thank you," I said.
You already said that.
"Did you make one for yourself?" Sveta asked.
I did, but I need a backpack for it to work. And I made a few others. This is mostly stuff I already had. The rest of my tech is done enough. I could work on it more, but that's like, it's one step back, 2 steps forward. I gotta take it apart. I might break stuff in the short term, and what if we got that call that needs us now? I don't want it broken. So I worked on stuff that didn't matter much.
"It's cool," I said.
I made one for Swan Song,
she said. Her mask hid her face behind a smiling facade as she looked down at the swooping white and black bird pin in her hand.
I wasn't thinking, because I was rushing to do them.
"I'm sorry, Kens," I said, reaching for her shoulder to give it a rub. It was hard when I couldn't hug her.
Do you think Damsel would want it?
She asked. I think... I glanced at the others and saw Byron grimace momentarily. She would love it. Black smoke?
Yep.
I think she would love it, but she's scared right now. Scared of anything relating her to Swansong especially, so she wouldn't accept it. She'd probably be mean about it, but I don't think she'd mean it.
Oh, yeah.
Give it to Natalie? I suggested.
No, I made one for Natalie already,
Kenzie said.
I know you don't have a costume, but I thought you might want something in case you're ever in trouble.
She gave Natalie an owl pin.
I wasn't sure if you liked owls, but I tried a book and it's hard...
Tried a book and it's hard to make it look it wasn't... okay.
You might want something in case you're ever in trouble.
She gave Natalie an owl pin.
I wasn't sure if you liked owls, but I tried a book, and it's hard to make a book look like I wasn't super lazy about it.
I like owls, Natalie said. Thank you. What does it do?
Blurs your outline some, with one setting. With the other, it burns out the battery for a really bright, really long flash. It works like my flash gun, so having your eyes closed isn't enough. Cover your eyes with your arm if you don't want your eyeballs to go splat and dribble down your cheeks.
Natalie held the device really carefully, staring down at it. How do I activate it?
Double tap it, then swipe left for the blur and swipe right for the flash.
Thank you, Natalie said, still looking like she was afraid to do anything with the pin. I think I'll have to keep it somewhere safe so I don't accidentally tap it.
Okay,
Kenzie said.
It's okay if you don't like it.
I like it, really. I'm getting quite a collection. Kenzie nodded. Kenzie, I said, did you actually nap? She froze. She gotcha, Sveta said.
I couldn't nap. I was too nervous. So I sorta listened to a book and I tinkered to take my mind off stuff. It really doesn't help that my emotions are really wonky today. If they weren't, I wouldn't have done that thing with the puppy. Probably.
It's been a wonky day, Rain said from the living room. He'd stood up and now stood in the gloom.
But, like, a bit more wonky for me. I won't go into any detail.
Okay, he said. I always get uneasy when the anniversary of my parents leaving me behind comes up. I can sympathize. Chastity leaned into the wall by the archway that separated her and Rain. Not meditating? Nah. Did you contact Love Lost and Colt? The phone, sitting on the hallway table, buzzed. Every set of eyes present went to it. Yeah, Rain said, voice soft. They're as ready as they can be. I told them about the meditating. I pressed the button. Victoria Dallin speaking. My team is here. It was a man's voice, but not defiance. Legend? You can make your pitch. We'll record it and disseminate it if... Boom, too fast. He's a speedy guy, but not that speedy. It was a man's voice, but not defiance. Legend? You can make your pitch. We'll record it and disseminate it if there's anything that... If there isn't... Oh, man. All right. We'll record it and disseminate it if there isn't anything problematic or deceptive. Whew. It was a man's voice, but not defiance. Legend? You can make your pitch. We'll record it and disseminate it if there isn't anything problematic or deceptive. Kenzie reached over, tapping on the belly portion of my breastplate. God. We'll record it and disseminate it if there isn't anything problematic or deceptive. Kenzie reached over, tapping on the belly portion of my breastplate. I covered up the mouthpiece.
Video?
She asked. Can it be video? I asked. Yes. Do you have a camera nearby? It's my experience that no video is better than a low-resolution laptop video. We have a camera, Tinker. Ah, he said. A pause, a moment longer than necessary. I had no idea if he was checking records or smacking himself in the face. Can she plug into the phone? It should receive the video signal. Yes. Call us if you run into any difficulty. We'll await your notification. The message will go to all radio. We'll await your notification. All right, actually, I can just start it right there. Call us if you run into any difficulty. We'll await your notification. The message will go to all radio. Some cell phones, televisions in the camps have them. Televisions in the camps? What the hell? The message will go to all radio, some cell phones, televisions in the camp. I think it's supposed to be an if. Televisions if the camps have them. Would make much more sense, so that's what I'm doing. Call us if you run into any difficulty. We'll await your notification. The message will go to all radio, some cell phones, televisions if the camps have them. We'll notify patrol groups on downtime that they should watch, but we won't force them to attend. If there are enough volunteers at a given camp, we'll use the portals to bring them where we need them. Have them get together and use the green... use 3 green... Have them... Oh, excuse me, stop. Okay. Have them gather together and use 3 green flares in an open area if they're waiting. If there are enough volunteers at a given camp, we'll use the portals to bring them where we need them. Have them gather together and use 3 green flares in an open area if they're willing. Thank you. Good luck. With that, he hung up. Kenzie ran off to get a camera. I frowned, my arms folded. People are going to die. Do you remember what you're going to say? Tristan asked, sitting on the stairs. I think so. We could go over it again, but every minute counts. Pen and paper, Sveta said, in case we need to communicate anything. Let's do this outside, I said. Kenzie had just returned with the camera. For the background, cabins and fires make a better backdrop than something that might make it seem like we're cozy in our homes when most of Gimel is living in tents. We moved outside. I looked back over the camp, walked over to where the backdrop was better and brighter, with a line of fires and various people gathered. Some crates the patrol had brought now stacked beneath the eaves of Rain's family barn.
Ready?
Kenzie asked. Her camera produced a light, illuminating me a little bit. She adjusted it.
Yeah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The light on the side of the camera went green. Citizens of Gimel, I spoke to the camera, grateful for the moment at my upbringing. Boy, I'm flubbing a lot today. Went green. Citizens of Gimel, I spoke to the camera, grateful for the moment. Grateful for the moment? Okay. Boy, oh boy. The light on the side of the camera went green. Falls apart. Citizens of Gimel, I spoke to the camera, grateful for the moment at my upbringing, at the lessons in poise and presentation. Now, I just had to get the words right. Start simple. Expand into the details as you go. Assume they know nothing. Some of you have seen the video where a cape was cornered and had a second trigger event. Unfortunately, this event was what we've taken to calling a broken trigger, stealing away her humanity and setting off a cascading series of events. Now, nearly a dozen monsters stand over our city. We are calling them Titans. This is why you were evacuated. I'm reaching out to you with the permission and help of the wardens, from one of the defensive camps at the edge of the disaster site. Man, I'm gonna have a sip of water. Collect my thoughts. City. You're calling them Titans. This is why you were evacuated. I'm reaching out to you with the permission and help of the wardens from one of the defensive camps at the edge of the disaster site. We've been fighting in shifts for half the day, and my group is about to rejoin the fight. We're taking the fight to the heart of the Titans, while others fight to keep them pinned down. For this, we're requesting your help. Able and ready volunteers who can follow instructions, handle themselves in a crisis, especially those who have experience in combat. If you heard that and you thought, handle themselves in a crisis, especially those who have experience in combat. If you heard that and you thought you could be one of those volunteers, we need you. Pause for effect, but don't let your vision waver. We have not been able to permanently stop any of them yet, but we have gathered information, and we now intend to use that information to take the fight to the place where they get their power. If we cut them off at the source of powers, a source that was revealed when they emerged, we might be able to leave them powerless or weak. They are few, and we, Cape and human, are many. Deep breath. This next part needed gravity. It deserved respect. The plan is that Capes fight the Titans to keep them pinned down, while other Capes escort the volunteer army into the cracks in reality. You would be using tools and explosives to damage their infrastructure. I won't lie to you about this. Capes are dying in every single encounter we have with them. Volunteers will die in this. But if we do nothing, if nobody volunteers, and if this works, then more people from Gimel are likely to die, including those too young and infirm to fight. We need numbers to do enough damage, and we need those numbers to be able, determined, and focused for the task. Less of a pause now, but making sure I wasn't rushing. Pacing mattered. Emergency kits at each evacuated settlement have flares in multiple colors. If you're willing, hug the people you care about. Leave now. Gather with other nearby volunteers. Use 3 green flares to signal us. We'll bring you to us. Dress to be warm in this weather and to be mobile. Thank you to those who choose to fight alongside us. To the rest of you, be safe and wish us luck. The green light at the side of the camera went out. Kenzie lowered it. We were too far away from the main camp to hear the buzz of conversation or their activities. There was only a whistle of wind and a snowfall of hard pellets no bigger than a poppy seed. Quiet, dark, and still.
Good,
Tristan said. It was so fucking dark at night, without the illumination of the city. My heart pounded from the adrenalation. Adrenalation. Pounded from the adrenaline. It was so fucking dark at night, without the illumination of the city. My heart pounded from the adrenaline of the speech. I very nearly jumped out of my skin when the portal appeared, with a shrieking rip of a sound, and a flare of illumination around the edges, where darkness hid an edge of reality and produced a slice of bright light. "Hey, look out," Chastity said. "That pin you meant for Swan Song?"
You want it? I have pins for the heartbroken that would fit you guys. They're on the kitchen table.
"Give it to me. I'll make sure Damsel takes it. I'll take mine, too." Kenzie handed over the pin. I approached Rain, took his hand in a handshake, hand on his shoulder. "Good luck in there."
I think I'd rather you had the luck, he told me, given what's on the line.
I gave his hand a squeeze, then let him go, flying over to where my gun had been parked near the house. The patrol guys were at the stable, guarding it, and stood from their seats as I flew in closer. "You're going?" Jester asked. I floated over to the gun and lifted it, finding the handholds, making sure my force field was cooperating before lifting it up. "It's time." "Gilpatrick just got called. He's going with Precipice, along with a bunch of other ex-PRT guys." "That's good," I said, trying to hide my general alarm. Gilpatrick was a good person. He'd shortchanged me a few times, but only because the job had required him to. The kids came first. The girl with complicated family and powers had to come second. "He's getting some gear together." "Gear doesn't go through, unless it's part of his self-conception." "Oh," Jester said. "Maybe it is," Camisola said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I nodded, though I wasn't sure I thought it was likely. Camisola said. Up there. "Maybe it is," Camisola said. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I thought it was likely. "I thought it was shitty of you to hide who you really were," Camisola said. "I was angry at you for a while, but you're doing good, I guess." "High praise," Jester said, smirking. "Keep doing what you're doing," I told them. "Be safe." "You already told us that on the broadcast," Jester said. "You should stop repeating yourself and go. Take your 5,000 pounds of gun, you ridiculous person." The weapon I held creaked as I hefted it, then flew to navigate it through the barn door. I flew to the portal. The others were splitting up. Natalie was staying behind with Kenzie and Rain. Chastity, I'd expected her to stay, but she was geared up, ready to go. Kenzie had me bend down. She gave me the eye camera, sliding it smoothly into my skull. I could see from the trace glow that illuminated her gloves and face that it was giving me the eye characteristic golden Stop. Okay. I could see from the trace glow that illuminated her gloves and face that it was giving my eye the characteristic golden glow now. Okay. Had me bend down. She gave me the eye camera, sliding it smoothly into my skull. I could see from the trace glow that illuminated her gloves and face that it was giving my eye. Man. I am all over the place today. And by all had me bend down. She gave me the eye camera, sliding it smoothly into my skull. I could see from the trace glow that illuminated her gloves and face that it was giving my eye the characteristic golden glow now, to match the effect. Boy, at least I got past the other one. Her gloves and face that it was giving my eye the characteristic golden glow now, to match the effect on my armor.
I'll be with you guys,
she said. I maneuvered my gun through the portal, and Chastity, Sveta, and Tristan followed me through. The de facto meeting place, the lobby of teachers' headquarters, tracked with mud and muck from the recent passage of many people coming in from the winter, though it was largely empty now. A space that a 4-story building could have fit in, large front doors opposite an unnecessarily wide set of stairs. The stories above us looked down at the lobby, and there were already capes and civilians gathered there. At the base of the stairs, something that might have been a truck lift to carry a truck up the stairs had been elevated to serve as a stage. A few of the wardens were there on the stage. And a truck lift to carry a truck up the stairs had been elevated to serve as a stage. Oh, lost the paragraph. And a truck lift to carry a truck up the stairs had been elevated to serve as a stage. A few of the wardens were there on the stage. I saw Naphtha, and I recognized Canary's face and uncannily yellow hair, though she wore power armor. Roughly 30 capes with a minimum of armor and weapons were by the front doors, forming a loose line. We were instructed to come, and we went. I took the back corner of the stage, holding my gun so it pointed at the wall above the front doors, because any other direction was problematic and threatened to put others in the line of fire. My team gathered on the stairs just beside me. Chastity came with us and approached the wardens.
Any reports yet?
I asked the warden nearest me.
Are they responding?
No idea. We sent patrol members who were willing to help out to the likely gathering places. They'll agree, and hopefully others will follow them. I nodded. I was spooked. Scared not because of what was happening. That was terrifying in its own right. But scared because I'd asked for people's trust, and I wasn't sure they'd extend it. If I didn't have powers, and my life had followed a similar enough course that I was still roughly the same person, I wasn't positive that I would have extended that trust. Portals began opening. The capes that had formed a line now gathered so there was space to file past them. Chastity skipped down the stairs to join that line. The first people to appear were more capes. There were other heartbroken, and Chastity called out to them. Others to form a defensive perimeter. Guards and guides for those coming through. Some of the capes who filed through were directed to the sides. Different role?
What are they up to? I asked the warden.
The group by the portals is checking those coming through, making sure they're not too angry or reckless, and that Chite isn't sending any double agents to us. There were some in the evacuation camps already.
Fuck, I said under my breath.
That's... evacuation camps already.
Fuck, I said under my breath.
That group is the one that's going to help us get down there with this many people, he said, indicating the group to the side. The patrol, as suggested by the warden, followed after capes, leading the way so the civilians in those camps didn't have to be the people making the first steps. And then the civilians. With 10 portals open, each wide enough for people to pass through in pairs at a time, there were easily dozens. I could ballpark it. 12, 24, 35, or 36. A classroom, but not an army. 50? A cape near the portals reached out to grab someone by the arm. Another cape joined them, and they steered the person away from the main group. The small disturbance didn't seem to stem the flow of newcomers. 100? Some more patrol groups. More people, in steadier numbers this time. People that looked scared. People that looked agitated. Some who looked awed by this place we were now in, and how far that staircase in front of them seemed to extend up. If they only knew the building's true scale. It was weird and complicated to see people I might have said were too young. Teenagers. Strange and uneasy to see... Teenagers. Yeah, just do that whole block over. Seemed to extend up. If they only knew the building's true scale. It was weird and complicated to see people I might have said were too young. Teenagers. Strange and uneasy to see people who wore shirts beneath unzipped coats. Not copes, coats. Man, I take a week off and everything falls apart. Complicated to see people I might have said were too young. Teenagers. Strange and uneasy to see people who wore shirts beneath unzipped coats that had capes and cape logos depicted on them. There were people who looked like they were despairing before we'd even fought this battle, a far cry from Natalie and the patrol, who seemed so collected in the face of this, and there were those who looked too hopeful, too proud to be here, like they hadn't realized the risk, or they'd heard people would die and couldn't believe those people might include them. You're heroes, I thought, looking at the group. I might have fit something like that into my speech, but it felt self-congratulatory. I hadn't wanted to ruffle feathers. How many was this? 2? 3,000? People were only trickling in now. The portals closed. Others opened. Half the number. More patrol emerged. They were followed by more civilians. Would this be 4,000? Maybe 5? It felt like not enough, considering the population of the city. It felt like a lot, considering what we were up against. I'd asked them to put their lives on the line. That still doesn't make sense. It felt like not enough, considering the population of the city. It felt like a lot, considering what we were up against. I guess. I feel like that would still feel like not enough, but okay, sure. Of the city. All right, yeah, it felt like a lot, okay, considering what we were up against. I'd asked them to put their lives on the line with no notice. I pulled my much-abused phone out of the pocket. Man. We're up against. Struggling today. I'd asked them to put their lives on the line with no notice. I pulled my much-abused phone out from the pocket beneath my armor. That fucking crack from Eric smashing it into the table. I typed one-handed, phone at my side. I want to remember their faces. Can you save them? These people are stepping up, and that shouldn't be forgotten. I didn't even send the message, and Kenzie's eye camera let me see the response. Gold text that appeared outside my normal field of vision. Will do. I made sure I scanned the crowd, searching every face there. A screen descended behind the stage. Naphtha stepped forward. The babble of nervous conversation went quiet. A few people acted with alarm as the portals closed behind them. Roughly 5,000, I thought. Entry point, Naphtha declared, his voice amplified by the microphone. The screen showed one particular section of crack. Short descent into what looks like a plane of red crystal. This crystal is a computer system, and what it computes is powers. In a matter of minutes, we're going to have people inside the system, mostly ex-PRT officers and patrol team leaders, doing what they can to interfere with the code, the software. You may even see them if you peer through the crystal. You must not harm them or harm the crystal if they are visible on the other side. Your job is to attack the hardware in specific areas. The briefing went on. Portals opened, but not because the speech was over. People were handing out equipment, pickaxes. A team with capes and warden staff was handing out parcels as well. explosive charges not unlike the one Imp had gathered, presumably going to people who were able and ready to handle them. The message from Kenzie flashed across my vision. Rain sleeps. What felt like 5 minutes, but was probably closer to 30 seconds, passed. We should be backing him up.
Thank you, Naphtha said. When the portals open, we're going to need you to move swiftly. The Titans won't be close, but they may be aware, and they'll be swift to arrive. Some of the ones I noted in particular. Titan Oberon's cell is swift-moving in particular.
Placing us at a location far from the Titans, but close to one of the presumed focal points. The screen perpetually had a corner with a map of the paths the energy had traveled.
We'll be right at your side,
Naphtha stated. I hefted the gun, lifting it from the floor. The portals appeared, wider this time. This many people took time to make their way through. More portals appeared on either side of the stage. Cold air blasted through, along with a bit of the snowfall. Sveta and Tristan walked through. I followed them. Into the darkness, into the cold, facing a hole in reality that branched across 3 spatial dimensions, with folds and cracks at the edges that caught snow and sliced at the wind. There were no city lights here, but some capes used powers to produce light. Capes on 2 rises above one mass of civilian volunteers. I took to the air, hefting my gun. Below me, Tristan was creating his little orange motes. The motes that hit the edge of the crack died, but there were enough and more appearing every second that he was able to create a kind of bridge over the edge. Once it was there and secure enough to My mouth's drying up. Man, I've gone through a lot of water this time. And more appearing every second, that he was able to create a kind of bridge over the edge. Once it was there and secure enough to not fall into the darkness below, he began reinforcing it. Metal struck rock as he walked up onto the bridge, looking down, and began to create a set of stairs or slide. Helicopters were taking off with people inside. Others were preparing. A cape granted flight to a whole crowd of civilians. They weren't flying in, thank God. That might have been a disaster if they'd tried, the way powers got weaker down there. They grabbed hold of ropes, and they slid down, using flight to help control their descents. As before, the patrol went down first. Sveta joined the first group of non-patrol civilians. Come on, I thought. Let this work. The golden text appeared across my vision. Titan Scotty is attacking one of the other entry teams. I tensed. The entry squads had been split up into 3 broader units. Those units were supposed to fan out. Already we were under attack. Already lives were probably being lost. Tense, slow with my weapon in my grip, I floated up and away from the group. Look out, I said, trying to keep my voice level and clear. If you can hear me, mark a good target for me. The crosshairs that appeared in my field of vision seemed to be fixed to one point of the crystal landscape. So far below me it looked like pitch black. I brought the cannon around, aiming for the spot. More notifications popped up, telling me I was off target. I adjusted appropriately, centering on the spot. Already dark, the sky seemed to darken a shade. I felt a shift in air pressure, like it was all a bit harder to fly in, or I was being pushed down. I twisted around, putting the gun below me, and I dropped my weapon. Titan Scotty, visible only by the glowing metal at the edge of each major panel of armor, was above me. I met her, flying to her, crashing into her with force field and everything else. I felt armor crack beneath the impact, transmitted by an awareness of physicality that wasn't touch. Then she was gone. Below me, swinging. I flew down, diving, letting my force field come back as I seized the gun by barrel first to pull it out of the way of a swinging axe arm. She hit my force field instead. I didn't have the handholds necessary for my weapon. Already hard to make out in the gloom, Scotty was drowned in darkness. That darkness became fire, illuminating everything from water to nearby buildings, fallen ones that had tipped over when the crack in reality had spread, and ones that had managed to stay standing. Naphtha repeated the assault. Scotty became a silhouette in yellow fire. Hands found handholds, and I twisted, still diving, but this time with my gun ready. I put a shot into her, the entire gun shuddering like it was trying to tear itself apart as it spat out a golden ray, carving a furrow into Titan Scotty, like a gouge that might be dug into white-hot armor with the right tool. There were other capes on the battlefield, ones who hadn't been there for the briefing, but who were helping us out. They capitalized on the shot, pressing the advantage while she was off balance, and while a part of her was damaged enough they could maybe pry it off or dig in. She disappeared, and I immediately searched for her location. Behind me? Above? No. Down. She was in the midst of that crystal landscape, where I could not fly without giving up my weapon. But I had anticipated that. From high above, I aimed at her and placed another shot, getting her attention, bringing her close. This time, I threw my weapon, insofar as that was possible, and met the onslaught, keeping her occupied. I let her hit me, and used the momentum from that to meet my gun where it was still falling through the air. I found the handholds and stopped it from falling. Gold text began to appear when I really needed to focus. I kept track of my force field, gauged what I could get away with, and kept my gun out of her way. Every second I could do this was a second people were getting down there, spreading out, looking for certain markers and target points. Other capes joined in. I had a good run there. We're getting down there, spreading out, looking for certain markers and target points. Other capes joined in with my fight against Titan Scotty, and I took the moment to breathe and to read the text. Nemean and Ophion incoming. The Nemean Titan. Victor. I wasn't even sure what to do about that. If I had one Titan dogging me like this and another who could knock me out and steal my capabilities if he got close enough, it wouldn't be possible to mount a defense. Except they weren't allied. We had to keep them separated. And then Ophion? Mr. Bao, the biomanipulator, with thousands of people at his mercy. We'll manage, I huffed, watching the capes keep Scotty occupied. Because we've left ourselves no choice to the contrary. Belay that, Tenzi communicated. Did I say Tenzi? Because we've left ourselves no choice to the contrary. Belay that, Kenzie communicated. Titan stuff is getting crazy. Multiple Titans mobilized. Stranger Titan is closest to you. Well, that chapter was pretty short. I think I'm going to do another one. I will need to get some water first, though. What am I doing? Get some dead air. Okay. 18.10. No, not 19. 10. Radiation. 18.10. Oh boy, .10. I can type, I swear. Radiation. Save. Okay. Alright, I'm going to step away for 1 minute to refill my water and come back and do more, because that was not very long. Be right back. All right, let's freaking go. After I skip these interludes. Or just the one, I guess. Okay, cool. I thought there was more than that. Wow. We got 19.1. Here we go. Time to lock myself in again. Okay. Oops, I need to do a new one here. Yep, save you. Do a new guy. New. Oh dear. Okay. I am gonna have to do some shenanigans here. Yes, this is saved. So close that. Okay. Looking good. Fix this. Not bad. I guess it's just always going to be the same height. Womp. No, I want it to be flat. There, okay. Cool. It's getting warm in this closet. All right. Let's have a sip of water first. Okay. Let's do it. Arc 19, Infrared, Chapter 1. I wanted to say we'd kicked the hornet's nest, with a whole mess of titans abruptly shifting their behavior in a response to our behavior, but the reality was that we were the hornets, and they were the comparatively huge figures who we could only hope... And they were the comparatively huge figures who we could only nip at and sting. With a whole mess of titans abruptly shifting their behavior in a response to our behavior. But the reality was that we were the hornets, and they were the comparatively huge figures who we could only nip at and sting. They were the ones with the tools to answer us, disarm us, to protect themselves. Our sole advantage was that the wardens had picked our battlefield well. We were distant from other titans, with only Titan Scotty as our immediate threat and oh my goodness, excuse me. This water and talking is making me burpy. Our sole advantage was that the wardens had picked our battlefield well. Oh my god, and I lost myself. Right there, okay. Our sole advantage was that the wardens had picked our battlefield well. We were distant from the other titans, with only Titan Scotty as our immediate threat and signifier that we were doing something right. The camera in my eye was displaying some of the data about the incoming titans. Ophion was coming from the east, Nemean from the west. The stranger titan from the northeast, with a vague marker that showed the likely area and a guess at the distance. By the connections we'd observed, all three appeared to be linked to Titan Fortuna. They were minutes away, distance and predicted time of arrival marked out in thin gold lines and golden sans serif digital font. The same program that Kenzie had used to track when breakthrough members would arrive, in a different color. There were other details marked out, but they were subtle. Trackers for my team members, faint unless I refocused my eyes to look for them. A digitized red slash stabbing skyward from the horizon, a beacon marked Class SS, with no instructions that we're supposed to go handle it. No instructions that we were supposed to go handle it. Look for them. A digitized red slash stabbing skyward from the horizon, a beacon marked Class SS, with no instructions that we were supposed to go handle it. With everything on the line right here, I wasn't sure I wanted the distraction of knowing. I'd do what I could here, at least until the civilians were evacuated and safe. I had little doubt that a label like that would be something I would be having to help with sooner or later. There was an immense kind of pressure to that. Titan Scotty was terrifying in her relentlessness. I mean, I guess she could be restless too, but she's relentless. Whew. Sooner or later. There was an immense kind of pressure to that. Titan Scotty was terrifying in her relentlessness. Like being on the ground, no flight, and having a building start to collapse nearby, tipping in your direction. Huge, immensely lethal, no guarantees, countless lives on the line. Over and over and fucking over again. Every second she was doing something. For right now, she was engaging multiple capes. Weld was too small to play the brute, and Titan Scotty hit hard enough that a man made of solid metal wouldn't necessarily survive what she did, so he'd welded limb extensions on, metal arms and legs that could be used to move faster and scoop up anyone in danger. One of them had been badly bent. Gibbet was using her power to create large metal cranes, while flyers flew the crane's hooks into gaps in Scotty's armor plating. Mostly, though, it seemed aimed at slowing down Scotty's attacks, snagging at her arms and limiting her range of movement, caging her in. It was a coordinated assault that included attacks, snagging at her arms and limiting her range of movement, caging her in. It was a coordinated assault that included some shaker powers, Tristan's among them, protecting the convoy that was making its way into the crack. I floated, waiting, one eye on the numbers that showed incoming Titans, another eye on Titan Scotty and the capes around her. I floated this way and that, ensuring my view of her was clear of obstacles. I saw the crimson in her fade out, and I hauled back on the trigger. The beam speared out, the machinery of the gun shuddering violently enough it almost canceled my force field. The beam raked her from axe hand to elbow. I was ready for her to appear beside me, but she carried through on her plan. The building didn't fall on me this time. She reappeared, close to the helicopters, but the impact from the shot I'd just fired had shifted her balance imperceptibly, shifted the position of one hand perceptibly, so it didn't come down with the speed or angle she'd intended. One axe hand punched into the back of a truck that was carrying people. The one I'd shot came down a second or two after, where Gibbet's cranes were already growing and crisscrossing. Metal creaked, bent, broke, and toppled. I'd bought a second or two, which let Gibbet buy another 2. That was time enough for someone to get a force field up, for vehicles to veer away, one truck's side scraping against another in its haste. I'd been an Alexandria light. Now I played the role of a faux legend, counting my shots carefully, mindful of battery, taking in the whole battlefield and figuring out where I needed to deliver the heavy fire. It required a different mindset. I couldn't identify the biggest problem, charge in with 95% of a plan in mind, and figure out what I was doing as I got between my target and the thing they were trying to accomplish. I had to line up my shots, make sure nobody was in the way, either in front of my target or behind her, and make every shot count. I shot again, not because of what Titan Scotty was doing, but because others were mobilizing, using powers, and I was betting that she was going to respond. I placed the beam in the hollow of her neck and flew down as she leaned back, to ensure I had the angle to keep the beam focused on one spot and keep her as unbalanced as possible, as long as I had her unbalanced and off guard. Having multiple hands gripping the gun made it easier to keep it steady, but I was finding some Having multiple hands gripping the gun made it easier to keep it steady, but I was finding some sympathy with Crystal's complaint that lasers were actually hard to aim. She'd given me a laser pointer at one point and asked me to keep it steady, and I'd thought I'd done okay then. I hadn't had adrenaline churning through my body to the point I had tremors in my actual hands. I hadn't been terrified then. She started teleporting away as I did the damage. She reared back, pushed a bit by the beam, and was still rearing back as she appeared nearby. No attack on arrival this time. The axe that had plunged into the truck was abraded, and the abrasions collected blood and pieces of the people she'd guillotined. I'd hoped for, wanted for her to come after me. Lives had been lost or irrevocably changed by the attack earlier. This spot of anticipation had maybe saved others, but it wasn't enough. This was the pressure being applied. An unstoppable, inevitable threat. Who would have been bad enough on her own? This was the pressure being applied. An unstoppable, inevitable threat. Who would have been bad enough on her own? A handful more on the way I had zero idea how to deal with, and a red mark on the horizon with the ominous Class SS label on it for later. If it was just me and my skin on the line, I was pretty sure I could have dealt. As a kid with superhero parents, I had dealt with my Aunt Jess's death, Fleur's death, with some vivid fantasies about being a heroine and making a great sacrifice, often involving revenge in some capacity. Taking out Kaiser. Purity, who had done the flying artillery thing and had jousted with my family enough times to stick in my consciousness. I'd moved past that, but with a perspective change. Artillery thing and had jousted with my family enough times to stick in my consciousness. I'd moved past that, but with a perspective change in the wake of it. Not fantasizing about death, but being okay with it. That hadn't changed since, accepting that Capes died, and in an Not fantasizing about death, but being okay with it. That hadn't changed since, accepting that Capes died, and in an ideal world they died doing something just. I knew I'd rather go out in battle than end up in another hospital room for the rest of my life. But these were civilians. People I'd brought into this fight with my words. These were people with lives, families, and actual live-into-old-age futures. I was terrified for them. Enough that I didn't feel brave, floating up here, fighting in a very different way than I was used to. The blood dripping down her axe hand as Capes tried to slow her down was more visceral to me than the bullet wound in my arm that ached even today, the gouges in my other arm, my sprained foot, and my missing fingernail. It was all I could do to stop myself from pulling the trigger and keep pulling it until this thing overheated or broke down. I waited, finger extending, watching, and trying to take in every detail I could. Capes were pressing in now, using everything they had to get her while she was off balance. Scotty tore her way free. Capes were pressing in now, using everything they had to get her while she was off balance. Scotty tore her way free of Gibbet's creations, now reinforced with Capricorn's stone. Lassos bound her while she was bent over. Another crane slowly rose up to press against her neck, and Capes clambered over her. Sveta was among them, not attacking so much as she supported others, helping them up. We had capes from the corner worlds joining in now. Semiramis's faction, Little Midas. Lung, apparently, was in Little Midas's camp. He burned bright in the dark, but was only in the early stages of his transformation. She moved, tearing free again, and I flinched, my finger touching the trigger without pulling it. Not the right moment. I kept the gun trained on her, moving to find different points that might be weaker, places where armor joined body. I kept the gun trained on her, moving to find different points that might be weaker. Lost my spot there for a second. I kept the gun trained on her, moving to find different points that might be weaker. Places where armor joined body, joints, places where she was thinner, and places she was already injured. As capes got in my way, I pulled my finger away from the trigger and focused on other areas that were more open, if less vulnerable. Flyers and other movers were facilitating, rather than doing the damage herself. Okay. From the trigger should be and focused on other areas that were more open, if less vulnerable. Flyers and other movers were facilitating, rather than doing the damage themselves, sticking close to a group of capes who were atop Titan Scotty's back. I saw Sveta on the top of her, doing just that. Tristan was on the ground somewhere, adding stone to the walls and creations that hemmed in Scotty's actions. I wanted to think we were doing what Tristan had suggested, working together, putting emotion aside. Being removed from things with a heavy weapon in my hands helped a bit in that regard. I saw the colors change, shadows shifting and disappearing, and I had to find them in the gloom. I fired a brief pulse of my laser at the side of her stomach, and the light of it provided enough of a clue to see where she was going. The bridge, where capes were helping people down through the cracks. Where she'd disappeared, capes had already positioned themselves to land on Gibbet's crane or other constructions below. Sveta joined flyers and other movers caught some of the ones who weren't positioned so well. Rescuing. Okay, yeah, got it. Had already positioned themselves to land on Gibbet's crane or other constructions below. Sveta joined flyers and other movers caught some of the ones who weren't positioned so well, rescuing them from falls or getting them to perches or safe ground. I fired a sustained shot directly into Titan Scotty's face. It was bright enough in the gloom that shadows chased my eye movements. Fuck, come on, flinch, come for me. She wasn't reacting enough, and the other capes who joined me in attacking her were slowing her down, but not enough to outright interrupt or stop her. Being flying artillery wasn't in my skill set. In a fight where I was using my force field and strength, or stop her. Being flying artillery wasn't in my skill set. In a fight where I was using my force field and strength, I'd usually have ideas for options. I, Victoria Dallin, Glory Girl, and Taris didn't often run into situations where I was in position, but with... Gonna redo that. Fight where I was using my force field and strength, I'd usually have ideas for options. I, Victoria Dallin, Glory Girl, and Taris didn't often run into situations where I was in position, but what I could do wasn't enough. 99 times out of 100, if I could get up close and they couldn't get away, I could do exactly as much damage as I wanted to. I needed a plan. I had to reach for examples for battle plans. I wasn't familiar enough with legend to be inspired by him. Crystal, then. I could remember debates where my aunt and kid cousin had been annoyed at Crystal's habit of dipping in... Okay, yeah. I wasn't familiar enough with legend to be inspired by him. Crystal, then. I could remember debates where my aunt and kid cousin had been annoyed at Crystal's habit of dipping into the fight. I dipped. I dove, letting my laser cannon fall more than I carried it. Cold wind whipped past me as I closed the distance on Titan Scotty, who had her back to me. I started shooting as I got closer. Getting closer had its advantages. My cousin Eric had had the range, but his beams were weak. My Aunt Sarah had been middle of the road. Crystal had the strongest beams of the three, the strongest top speed and carrying ability to her flight. So why did she get in close? It made it easier to aim. I aimed for weak points, damage done while capes had been swarming. So why did she get in close? It made it easier to aim. I aimed for weak points, damage done while capes had been swarming Titan Scotty. It made it easier to use other powers. Crystal was more of a flyer, and she could create force fields in midair. Part of the reason she liked to get in close was that she created force fields at mid to short range. It was easier to shoot someone when you could create a wall in their way, put them up against the wall, and blast them. I didn't have force fields in that same sense. I saw a damaged section of her armor, blasted it, and continued blasting as I plummeted. In the last few seconds of my descent, I twisted in the air to get where I could kick my laser cannon up and away, and carried on down without reorienting myself. I could only dive while shooting because the weapon had no appreciable recoil. No real Newton's law of motion at play here. No bullet being fired forward, gun kicking back in response. I crashed into the same site I'd been blasting, as fast as I could dive, force field hands drawn together into a point. Hot, cracked armor caved in, cracked further, and shifted position beneath me, like I'd driven a boat into the middle of a bridge. Immediately, she twisted around, swinging for me. This was more familiar ground. I kicked off and away from the impact site, flying around the axe that was coming for me and over her head, blasting with my aura while no capes were close enough to be collateral damage. I'd hoped it would prompt her to come for me, seizing her attention. I'd really hoped it would hit that mental button that made her teleport, so I could exploit it. No such luck. It did seem to get her attention and provoke a follow-up swing, which forced me to evade and delayed me in my chase of my falling gun. I caught my weapon maybe 20 feet off the ground, grabbing a handhold with one actual hand, and flew hard, helping it rotate so it would be in the optimal position as I landed. My force field came back up, and I landed with a force that cracked ice and made fluids gush around the cracks. Multiple hands grabbing multiple handholds, the entire laser cannon's body creaking and protesting at the force of its landing, distributed across my force field. The force field popped, and I let the cannon drop to the frozen ground to my right with a violent crunch, metal creaking. Panting for breath, I crouched there, facing Titan Scotty, who was so tall I couldn't really encompass her in the field of view that extended from the top of my bottom eyelid to the bottom of the other. Okay. Panting for breath, I crouched there, facing Titan Scotty, who was so tall I couldn't really encompass her in the field of view that extended from the top of my bottom eyelid to the bottom of the other. Couldn't do that too many more times. The gun wouldn't take that kind of strain from being caught from terminal falling speed. But I'd gotten her attention again. She wasn't focusing on the civilians or the bridge. The armor at her shoulder was damaged, and the armor beneath was visible, raw and flesh-like where it attached to yet another layer of armor beneath that. Meat and bone lattice that looked almost like lengths of spline that connected panel to panel. I'll take a moment for a bit of water. Sup, dude? Not too bad, living the COVID life. Pretty much every day is the same. How about you? Hot damn, man. Yeah, we're still trying for our first handful of months, but yeah. But congratulations, that's awesome. Boy. That's a good one. My wife's freaking out about it a bit, but I'm like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, I was like, let's go a year before we even think about it being an issue. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've heard. Like, I think my was about a year and a half for them. So, you know. It's just funny because several of our friends, like, all got it within, like, a couple months. So, she's freaking out a bit. And I'm like, seriously, you need to just chill out. Yeah. Yeah, seriously. Like, everybody's getting married at the same time. Everybody's having kids at the same. Oh, yeah, it's late for you. Yep. Yep, motto of my life right now. Oof. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to a return to waking up at normal hours. I've slid to where I wake up at like 9 a.m. every day, and it's terrible. But anyway, yeah, go get some rest. Yep, catch you later. And bone lattice that looked almost like lengths of spline that connected panel to panel. What's there beneath the surface, Berserker Titan? Is there a glimmer of a personality, like with Fumehood? Or are you dead inside, like Oberon? Are you angry? Is there a part of you I can drill at that will get you chasing me? Fuck you, I hope so. There was something about her I just found myself hating as I saw her straighten, rolling the shoulder I'd just made a crater in. Dealing with her was like facing down someone who's... With her was like somebody who screamed at my face constantly, okay? Hating as I saw her straighten, rolling the shoulder I'd just made a crater in. Dealing with her was like facing down someone who screamed in my face constantly. No relief, no room to reason with her. If she turned away from me, It was to inflict herself on others. And it wasn't screaming. She was silent, and she killed people. Just an inevitable, constant horribleness. The worst parts of Capes distilled. She felt like the worst possible opponent to be facing right now, as the countdown showed the other Titan's arrival was imminent. She wore us down, broke our backs. Backs? To be facing right now, as the countdown showed the other Titan's arrival was imminent. She wore us down, broke our backs, ground down our spirit, demanding constant vigilance, because 1 second of failing to account. All right. Broke our backs, ground down our spirit, demanding constant vigilance, because 1 second of failing to account for details meant she could appear anywhere on the battlefield and lives would be lost. And the others? Nemean, Ophion, the stranger? They would capitalize on us lacking will, stamina, or focus. They would capitalize on us lacking vigilance. She surged toward me, past Lung, who had grown a bit, using his fire. Maybe because she's... He surged toward me, past Lung, who had grown a bit, using his fire. Maybe because she'd seen me looking at Lung again, Kenzie passed on a message.
Lung is possible game plan. They think he might get strong enough to lock Scotty.
It made some sense. If Lung could get strong enough that he remained the largest threat to Titan Scotty, he would be her target every time she teleported. I wasn't sure what his upper limit was, but I knew that when he'd had a good 10 or 15 minutes of growing time, he had been able to take on the entire Brockton Bay Protectorate, plus visitors and guests. He didn't get tired, and his regeneration sped up. Able to take on the entire Brockton Bay Protectorate, plus visitors and guests. He didn't get tired, and his regeneration sped up as he escalated. Maybe there was a special case where he could get locked in an endless fight against the one Titan. The problem was that took time. We had a minute. Stop. Okay. Fight against the one Titan. The problem was that took time. We had a minute before Nemean arrived. The others would come shortly after. With my force field, I picked up the edge of the gun, then found the handholds. I hadn't even lifted it fully off the ground before I fired, aiming for the worst damage at the side of her head. I floated, and I was slow to take to the air with my burden. I wasn't going to leave it behind, though. I kept shooting until I heard the beep, the double beep, and the triple beep that marked the weapon overheating. Capes erected barriers and weapons. Laser lassos, cranes, outcroppings of rock, force fields. A few brutes. Few brutes, not just one. Weapons. Laser lassos, cranes, outcroppings of rock, force fields. A few brutes got in the way. Fuck you, I thought, staring her down. I spared a brief glance toward the people who were descending into the crack below. I'm not going to leave this weapon where you can smash it. If you want it, you're going to have to make me drop it, and I'm going to fight you every step of the way. It wasn't enough to stop her. I braced for the impact. The number of defenses going up between me and the Titan increased. More force fields, more barriers, spikes. A few capes stepped in as she slowed down. I kept firing, floating back while I did it.
First thought, aw, baby cousin got a laser of her own,
I heard the voice. Another laser joined mine, firing in the same general direction.
Second thought, how the hell did you get a long-ranged laser and put yourself in a position to collect more injuries?
Crystal called down to me. She grimaced as she made another crimson force field, which Scotty immediately shattered by lurching through it.
I got the idea from you.
Lies!
Reinforcements. The wardens were on top of things, and as the clock ticked down the last 20 seconds for the Nemean Titan to appear on the scene, our guys were already here, relocating and preparing us for the imminent attacks. Good job, wardens.
You got so much shit for breaking formation and getting into the thick of it,
I called out.
Lies!
She said again, sounding more amused than anything.
It's true,
my Aunt Sarah said, adding her beam to ours. Bright violet. Her force field was already in the way, placed more to brace some of the constructions and keep them from toppling down than to stand in Scotty's way on its own. Her voice had a haunting quality to it.
I remember it.
Well, shit, what am I supposed to say to that?
Crystal asked.
I never got hurt.
I didn't get hurt just now,
I retorted.
Because we saved you.
Stupid, to be distracted and doing this. But it was stupidity that made it easier to breathe and get out from that pressure that was building up. Reinforcements were good. Scotty disappeared, leaving Shadow first. Aunt Sarah was maybe the third person among the assembled capes to respond accurately, locating the Titan and sending a bright violet beam straight to it. Damage-wise, it didn't do a ton, but it did make for a very noticeable, clear pointer to where the threat was. When the Titan wasn't illuminated by nearby spotlights, it was dark out, and the city was unlit. It was hard to tell she was there until she was there in full. I aimed, firing, floating closer. My family members followed, flying alongside. My vision in the one eye flashed. Yeah, I thought, I've been watching the countdown.
Measurements may not be exact, but they'll be pretty good.
The Nemean and a series of circles drawn in the air around it. He slouched, arms long and hands wreathed in clouds of gold, with golden locks on his head that became crown-like at the top. Of all the Titans, he seemed to have the most of a face, with twists of golden hair forming gaps and patterns as they trailed across what would have been his face. He moved on all fours, fast, and put buildings between himself and us. We tripped an alarm, mobilizing like this. He was cowardly, hard to track, lighter and leaner than many of the Titans. 10 stories. Whew. I had a fairly good run there. He was cowardly, hard to track, lighter and leaner than many of the Titans. 10 stories tall, maybe, and he scaled a skyscraper near the coast without toppling it, though rubble fell. Still halfway up it, peering over the top, he moved behind it, so the bulk of the skyscraper blocked our view of him. Fell. Ooh, I'm getting hungry. Still halfway up it, peering over the top, he moved behind it, so the bulk of the skyscraper blocked our view of him, then leaped to one side. The building fell. He disappeared into the maze of fallen and half-fallen buildings. Kenzie's tracker started only intermittently working, updating on his location, presumably as others got a glimpse of him. Excuse me. I flew up, shooting Scotty with working, updating on his location, presumably as others got a glimpse of him. I flew up, shooting Scotty while keeping part of my attention on the lion. Shit. He wasn't flanking us or Scotty.
Stop him!
I called out. An exceedingly unnecessary alert appeared in the vision of my right eye, telling me what I'd already realized. Kenzie, presumably, was alerting the others, and it had been faster to send to all than to send. Unnecessary alert appeared in the vision of my right eye, telling me what I'd already realized. Kenzie, presumably, was alerting the others, and it had been faster to send to all than to send to everyone but me. The Nemean Titan had circled the battlefield and now charged for the back line of our civilian group. The trucks that hadn't yet made it to the crack. The people waiting for helicopter transportation. Stragglers. I shot him, and he stumbled. Others joined in. He was tenacious, if nothing else, and he was fast enough that even limping and beaten by attacks from 5 different directions, he got to them faster than they got away from him. I watched as people fell like dominoes. Trucks that had been moving veered off the road or collided with one another. And he stood taller, no longer moving on all 4s. His body shifted composition. I shot again. He hopped to one side, rolling on landing, and ended up with all 4 legs beneath him, clawed extremities set so far apart his belly almost grazed the ground. I shot again, holding down the trigger, mindful of the civilians who were so hard to make out in the gloom, and he sprung to the one side, tore free of 2 glowing lassos that tried to shackle him, and got closer to the middle of our civilian group. I watched as helicopters wobbled, then changed in orientation, drifting off to the side to find landing spots with a mechanical fluidity. People on the ground weren't so lucky. No automated landings in cases of driver incapacitation. He moved through them like something hungry. There was no fighting him, no getting close and delivering a telling blow. I could see how far the effect reached by the line where drivers remained where they were and where trucks were steering around, driving off the road to get elsewhere. Fuck you, Victor, I thought. You hurt so many people for selfish, ignorant reasons, and you became this, just doing more of the same. I focused my laser on him. Crystal and Aunt Sarah did the same. He didn't like being shot. Nothing suggested he was more fragile than Scotty, but as a Titan, he seemed to have a wholly different personality. He backed off as the lasers focused him down, and darted around a building as a feint, reversing direction while we couldn't clearly see him, before sprinting off in another direction, toward our ground-based reinforcements. Capes shot him from the one flank, while we bombarded him from the other, suppressing, buying time for people to shake off the stupor that came with being too close to the skill-stealing Nemean Titan and start driving or flying toward the crack in reality. Off to the side, more reinforcements flowed into the crack in reality as Scotty teleported, presumably down, aiming for the people below. I flew to a vantage point where I could focus on the Nemean Titan while watching out for Scotty. Aunt Sarah found... no. More water. I flew to a vantage point where I could focus on the Nemean Titan while watching out for Scotty. Aunt Sarah saw her before I did, peering past the gloom with eyes that saw light in a different way. The laser she fired down at Scotty marked the target I was aiming for. The cannon shuddered as I fired, and I heard 2 chimes. Not the beeps that marked heat level. Battery. I was half out. It was too much to stay on top of. 2 highly mobile enemies who barely flinched when we attacked them. I had a responsibility to stall them, slow them down, and stop them from getting to the civilians. The best of humankind throwing themselves into this hot mess to try to make a difference. I couldn't descend to fight Scotty in the same way. If I went to... redo that. Best of humankind throwing themselves into this hot mess to try to make a difference. Oh, oops, looked at the wrong starting paragraph. Best of humankind throwing themselves into this hot mess to try to make a difference. I couldn't descend to fight Scotty in the same way. If I went too deep into the cracks, I'd lose powers. I could stay near the opening, though, and rain hell down her from below. On her from below, from above. That's wrong. Rain hell on her, and rain hell down on her from above. Yeah, that's in the same way. If I went too deep into the cracks, I'd lose powers. I could stay near the opening, though, and rain hell down her. Now, if I can just say it correctly. In the same way. If I went too deep into the cracks, I'd lose powers. I could stay near the opening, though, and rain hell down on her from above. Unable to see as many details, I was left to shoot more, in hopes the shots would count. The Wardens had kept Tinker devices and Master minions in reserve for fighting the Nemean Titan, and now those minions were wrapped up in a tooth-and-nail fight. Some floundered, losing all capacity, but some didn't. "Heads up," I said as I lined up more of a shot on Scotty. I couldn't see as many flickers and flashes suggesting she was under attack. "This might bait her in." "Great," Crystal said, sarcastic. "Be ready," Aunt Sarah added. All business, all focus. In the gloom, I could see Crystal's expression momentarily change. I could only imagine how complicated her feelings were. I pulled the trigger. A golden beam pouring into the crack in reality to the Titan far below, who was trudging toward our civilians. It struck home, gold light splashing on impact, and I had to cancel my shot before it went off course or went too far. Aunt Sarah flipped around, throwing up a force field. Crystal did the same. Titan Scotty behind... Wow, alright. Aunt Sarah flipped around, throwing up a force field. Crystal did the same. Titan Scotty behind us. She cleaved through one force field, then lost momentum cutting through the next. I kicked the axe hand before she could move it. She cleaved through one force field, then lost momentum cutting through the next. I kicked the axe hand before she could move it, and manually reached into the handhold for the trigger while I fell, my force field gone. If she had eyes on her face, it would have blinded her, but it didn't. In an effort to slow my fall, Crystal threw up a crimson force field. I hit it, but the weight of the cannon shattered it a quarter second later. My force field returned, and I slowed the cannon's fall. Again, metal strained audibly. It hadn't liked the catch after my diving attack. Scotty disappeared, appearing on the other side of us. The reinforcements arrived once more. Out of the crack, flying and using mover powers, riding giant centipedes, or standing on the deck of a tinker plane with advanced guard aesthetic and a battle platform on top. With some careful flying, force fields, and the help of the pressure from the more mobile reinforcement group, we were able to pull back. I warned my family, aimed, and then shot once again for good measure. Scotty didn't come for us. I could hear Damsel's blast as she closed the distance, chasing Titan Scotty. I saw others running through the dark. We had allies, but a lot of them were ones I didn't recognize. No Parian, no foil. Sveta was there, but busy. Rain was sleeping, and Kenzie was tracking the rain situation. I felt my heart... But busy. Rain was sleeping, and Kenzie was tracking the rain situation. I felt my heart sink as more alerts flashed in the corner of my eye, simultaneous. The Nemean Titan's friends. The Ophian Titan looked like an artist had begun with a tumor and sculpted the tumor to be as beautiful as was humanly possible to do, with gold highlights and black recesses. Its folds like... as was humanly possible to do, with gold highlights and black recesses. Its folds like folds of a brain or intestine. Black bands and panels formed a sort of jacket or vessel to bind the gigantic tumor. Lights and black recesses. its folds like folds of a brain or intestine. Black bands and panels formed a sort of jacket or vessel to bind the gigantic tumor's shape to the rough form of an androgynous human, and black needles radiated out from its scalp, shoulders, and chest. All wet, head to toe, with moist air wicking off of it in the form of clouds like frozen breath. And the trio of creatures keeping it company were larger than any of the titans we'd fought yet. Not so big as the Dauntless Titan, but comparable to storms on a city's bay before a weather event that shut down the city. Crafted flesh, towering skyward, reaching from ground to clouds. He approached from one direction. Crafted flesh, towering skyward, reaching from ground to clouds. He approached from the one direction. The stranger approached from the other. Or so I assumed. I couldn't look in that direction. It wasn't that I tried and failed. I couldn't try. We had more reinforcements, but it felt like so little. "This is hell," I said, dividing my attention between 4 titans now, or 3 titans and 1 giant absence. The Nemean titan kept moving around, flanking, chasing. It passed the titan Scotty, who staggered, and the 2 scuffled momentarily before parting ways. The Nemean titan was hungry, and Titan Scotty had enemies to target. "Warning!" Kenzie's message appeared at the edge of my field of view. "Titan Oberon and Augur incoming." I looked in the direction of the red slash. Augur had been over there. I could guess now. "This is actual hell," I said. "Yeah," Crystal echoed me. "You set a goal," Aunt Sarah spoke, purple irises bright in the dark. "Get the civilians down there safe and sound. Minimum of casualties." "There were casualties," I said, frantically looking between the various targets. "What the fuck do I even shoot now?" "There's about to be a lot more." "There were always going to be casualties, Victoria," my aunt said. "We've done a good job of keeping them to a minimum." "No," I said. "Any number above 0 was always going to be a failure. Saying it anything..." I said. "Any number above 0 was always going to be a failure. Saying it's anything but is shirking responsibility. Set your goals, keep your goals realistic, and let yourself be happy when you meet them." Oh, no, that's Crystal. "Responsibility. Set your goals, keep your goals realistic, and let yourself be happy when you meet them," Crystal finished, speaking alongside the woman who was, and simultaneously wasn't, her mother. My laser cannon clacked and roared as I fired at Scotty. She was preoccupied, though. The wardens were taking the primary focus in this moment. "My mom always said we needed to deny the other side their goals," I said, quiet. "They want to crush us, slowly and steadily." That's my stomach. Getting hungry. "Always said we needed to deny the other side their goals," I said, quiet. "They want to crush us, slowly and steadily. They wipe out humanity, connect to one another, and discard our planet. They're succeeding." "I remember discussing plans and policies with your mother when the team was new," Aunt Sarah said. "I never imagined we'd pass them on to our individual kids like this." "Thinking a lot about memories and remembering?" I asked, words less aimed at her and more at the darkness that pressed in all around us. The Nemean Titan stopped running for a second, possibly because he had found a group to leech from. I shot him, spooking him and scaring him off from his target. Each time he ate, he stood a little taller, moved more confidently. Not that I could lock my attention to him. The Titan Scotty was still out there, still alternating. Not that I could lock my attention to him. The Titan Scotty was still out there. Oh, I lost my spot. Where is it? There it is. Not that I could lock my attention to him. The Titan Scotty was still out there, still alternating between attacking our most aggressive capes and going after the civilians. I could trust the capes to handle themselves, though I'd help where I could, but the civilians demanded my attention and protection. I fired at her to help where I could, but the civilians demanded my attention and protection. I fired at her a few times. She was wrapped up in a fight, Deathchester and a hero team mobbing her. "Take cover!" A cape on the ground screamed. We flew to take cover well before we knew what we were taking cover from. I saw my Aunt Sarah, stripped of large portions of her old personality, place her hand to her mouth. Her purple eyes were fixed on the distance. I looked, and I saw only darkness. "What am I missing?" I asked. "We're losing capes," she said. She could see in the dark, as a part of her power, just like bright lights didn't disorient her. "Capes," she said. She could see in the dark, as a part of her power, just like bright lights didn't disorient her. "Crystal," I asked, "can you write on the wall? I need night vision, or something close to it." She began doing it, scratching letters into a building face. I blinked twice to bring up the menu, selected Scan, and ran my eye over the words. They were highlighted in gold, converted to plain text, and disappeared into the darkness at the edge of my field of view. Maybe it wasn't possible, but I wasn't going to rule out that Kenzie might have had another blip in her common sense. "On it," the words appeared. I saw a progress bar appear, moving forward intermittently. "Best I can do." My vision shifted, the darks becoming darker, the brights becoming brighter. Outlines were highlighted. A group of villains on a rooftop that were harassing the Nemean Titan. The darks becoming darker, the brights becoming brighter. Outlines were highlighted. A group of villains on a rooftop that were harassing the Nemean Titan abruptly stopped, and there was an explosion in their midst. I watched as one jumped from the building's top. He couldn't fly. I was pretty sure it wasn't a brute. "The stranger," I said. A massive blob of area we couldn't even look at, and he lurked somewhere within it. With a power that wasn't the "don't look" ability, he was reaching out. There was no pulse in the air, no wave, no energy, light or shadow. No sign he was doing it that we could trace back to him. But our briefing had said he took people's sanity from them. There was a chance it was permanent. I hefted my gun and shifted position to get to the corner of the building. From cover, I began shooting. I could shoot at the edges of his effect, but the closer I got to the center, the more my hand the weapon's barrel struggled. The more my hand on the weapon's barrel struggled to stay on target? Yeah, I'll do that. The edges of his effect, but the closer I got to the center, the more my hand... Oh, no, that's the hole. And shifted position to get to the corner of the building. From cover, I began shooting. I could shoot at the edges of his effect, but the closer I got to the center, the more my hand on the weapon's barrel struggled to stay on target. Like I was metal and a magnet was repulsing me. I did what I could, firing. Targeting ground I remembered was cracked. "We need to fall back," Aunt Sarah said. "Most of the civilians are below. We need a defensive line." I nodded, even as I kept up my shooting, kept trying to make sure no capes were in my line of fire, even though I struggled to see straight. The highlighting and tracking effect, at the very least, marked those that Kenzie could track. Diamonds with circles within them to frame who was where, and where the various groups were. I might have been borrowing against the future to buy time in the present, but I aimed for areas of the city that were shaky, breaking down road with shots from the laser cannon, knocking down buildings. Anything to put wreckage and inconvenience in the Stranger Titan's way. Crystal touched my arm, and I flew with her, low to the ground, using buildings and even cars as cover so the Stranger Titan wouldn't see us and do whatever it was he did to take our minds from us. I was relieved to see Tristan, relieved to see Sveta, but I couldn't articulate that. I immediately went to my next bit of cover, shooting more. Because if that thing got close enough to us, we were gone. Done. I wasn't the only one opening less discriminate fire on the Titan, aiming for the periphery of it in hopes the devastation would slow it down or distract it from its course. Others were bombarding, or sending in the master minions they'd for the periphery of it in hopes the devastation would slow it down or distract it from its course. Others were bombarding, or sending in the master minions they'd intended to use against the Nemean Titan. Crystal floated up to a section of building above me, her boots dripping wet onto my hood, but she added her lasers to my cannon fire. "He moved!" someone on the rooftop called out. My weapon beeped to tell me it was at 25%. "Mobilizing!" Narwhal called out. If Narwhal was here, then so was Vista, and Vista being here, I just had to look to spot the lip of one crane in reality being peeled upward to form a kind of wall. Naturally, we mobilized to get behind or around that wall. Crystal pointed my attention to Naturally, we mobilized to get behind or around that wall. Crystal pointed my attention to Titan Scotty, who had engaged with another group of villains. Water. Naturally, we mobilized to get behind or around that wall. Crystal pointed my attention to Titan Scotty, who had engaged with another group of villains, including Little Midas's cronies. Lung wasn't as big as he had been, which suggested he hadn't been able to build up steam consistently enough before his opponent had disengaged from the fight. Couldn't keep that fire burning. I shot her until she moved out of view, then immediately switched to general fire toward the Stranger Titan, pacing out my shots to avoid overheating my weapon, ever mindful of the ammunition count. I knew I was spending ammunition, but I did have something of an agenda. I couldn't call it a plan, because it was selfish. Aunt Sarah was right. We had accomplished our initial goal. Being able to shoot Titans and potentially have that shot matter had been essential, but it wasn't good enough now. The weapon notified me when it was at 15%, then again at 7%. Narwhal shouted. Capes hurried to the one side. Ophian's creation was attacking, a tide of flesh. I added my gunfire to the response, flying up for a vantage point that didn't risk shooting some cape in the back of the head, then putting shots in the thing. Until I pulled the trigger and nothing came out. I dropped it, undid the clasps, and hauled out the power cell. "Can someone fling this at one of the Titans?" I asked. "I don't know if it'll do anything, but it can't hurt." "Let me tinker it," someone said. "It'll do something." I let them. "Find someone to do something with it after." "Got it," the tinker said. "Shit, is this dragons?" "Yeah," I said. "Cool." I wasn't sure I was in a place where I could have uttered a cool. The Nemean Titan was prowling at the periphery, looking for an excuse to lunge into our midst, at which point there'd be nothing we could do. But even a few force fields in his way were enough to discourage him. Scotty was out there too, sometimes, and was currently scuffling with the tide of flesh that scraped buildings from foundations. It wasn't durable, but there was so much of it there wasn't a lot she could do, and she was far stronger than we were, on average. The gun was lighter without the energy core. I flew around more, careful to stay out of the stranger's possible line of sight, making a general retreat with my gun as a shield of sorts. The capes on foot jogged through the ruined city, leaped over cracks, and hurried toward our wall, the curled-up lip of one large crack. I flew over the crack, looking down, and Kenzie's night vision didn't do a good job of peering through the distortion and noise of it. I went straight to the civilian line that hadn't yet descended into the crack. For some of them, there was a reason. The truck that had delivered my gun had delivered the extra power cores. It was left unguarded, the patrol officers busied elsewhere taking care of people who had been hurt in crashes or injured by other means. I loaded the power core into my gun. I left it. I'll be back for you, gun, I thought. But others take priority. I need to make sure they're okay, and I can't bring you. I flew for the crack, into that morass where powers were so much weaker, to find the people who were supposed to destroy key parts of the infrastructure. Men and women in winter clothes and patrol outfits were hurrying along the landscape of red crystal, dusted with snow from high above. They were gathering at strategic points. 2 of the points we'd wanted to hit were close to our starting point. Just had to get the necessary people down here. Tinker tanks flanked the group, trundling along. Turrets sweeping around nervously, looking for a target to shoot. Automated. My flying was getting sluggish, but I still moved closer to the surface. Through the crystal, I could see movement. One was on the other side of the Still moved closer to the surface. Through the crystal, I could see movement. One was on the other side of the hard surface, a titan-like thing moving across the landscape's internals, an agent of the powers. It took me another minute before I found who I was looking for. Kenzie had mapped it out for me earlier, the starting point when entering through Rain's dream. I found Rain and the patrol on the far side, saw him see me. I pointed at the agent I'd spotted, and he made a hand motion that looked like a confirmation. Still running. Purposeful. Focused. A detonation in the distance made me conclude the third spot. Yeah. Okay. And that looked like a confirmation. Still running. Purposeful. Focused. A detonation in the distance made me conclude the first bombs had gone off. It wasn't. The tanks were reacting to Scotty's appearance. When so much of the environment was flat and sloping, she was a stark contrast, impossibly tall, to the point it felt like she distorted the distance between us and the surface. She attacked, and the tanks unloaded. People used guns. Those were the detonations I'd heard, echoing over the hard ground. There were powers used from the surface, exploding around her, altering the crystal, and periodically making her stumble. It wasn't nearly enough. When she wasn't on the surface, she was down here, doing this. I flew over, struggling to move through the air, to navigate. I had my force field, and it felt thin, even though it was so thin as to be unnoticeable normally. I wasn't sure I trusted it against Scotty, but I'd asked people to fight here, and I couldn't stand back. I used flight to bound forward and help guide my running more than I flew on my own. I tried to get some air, raised up my force field, and used my aura. My force field has always been something that took one good hit and then took a bit to recharge. Here's hoping it still takes one good hit, and the recharge is what suffers from my being down here. She swatted me, not even with the blade, and sent me careening. Flight helped kill the worst of my momentum, but the landing was still a hard one. I looked back, and she was gone. How's our progress? I called out.
Slow!
We need to hurry it up, I called out, my volume lower as I floated toward the center of the working group. If the group above buckles, she's going to single out this group, and we don't have the firepower to stop her. I looked up, straining to see reality on the far side of the cracks. I only saw what might have been the Nemean Titan, another omnipresent threat that was impossible to pin down. If he got down here, he wasn't going to teleport back up to the fight. The Nemean Titan, another omnipresent threat that was impossible to pin down. If he got down here, he wasn't going to teleport back up to fight the next big threat. He'd be down here for good. Pickaxes dug into the crystal surface. People with bombs stood by, ready to put them into holes. Chunks ranging in size from my fist to a small dishwasher had been pulled out of the hole. "Dig what you can," I said, looking down at it. "I'm going to fly up and get my laser cannon. I'll see if I can't drill it a little deeper. Then you let me get clear and you bomb it."
"All right,"
one man huffed. "After that, we might have to evacuate you guys," I told him. "What we're doing got all of their attention." "We noticed. A couple hundred of us died up there," a woman said. The words were chilling, my nod stiff. I flew away, to get my gun and to hurry this along. We didn't have all night, or anything close to it. My flight was more horizontal than vertical, as I struggled to pull up and away with my power dampened. I saw Rain, carrying on to his destination. He saw me. People who were moving from landed helicopters to work sites looked between us, maybe finally realizing what I'd been struggling to convey in my speech, what Naphtha had struggled to convey about how this place worked. There were people inside the computer, like Rain, and there was us, hacking at it from the outside. But it was connected to all of us. Chunks of broken crystal littered the area, and those chunks showed reflections, stuff I'd seen inside the computer. I could see that Rain and those chunks showed reflections, stuff I'd seen inside the computer. I could see that Rain saw them too, that the civilians were taking note, their attitudes shifting imperceptibly. Images of me wearing a Glory Girl costume, hurting a man in worker's clothes, smacking him into a wall, hard. Images of a young adolescent Rain hurling a Molotov at an old house. An image of me putting a dumpster into a man. Punting a dumpster. She did put it into him, I guess, but via punting. Images of a young adolescent Rain hurling a Molotov at an old house. An image of me punting a dumpster into a man. An image of Rain spitting in a scared girl's face before adjusting his mask. A bystander, who looked shocked by the image's appearance, was depicted in one blurry scene, kicking a dog that didn't move out of his way fast enough. The people on the ground looked between us. Depicted in one blurry scene, kicking a dog that didn't move out of his way fast enough. The people on the ground looked between us and the images, silent, staring, and judging. The images kept playing as I floated higher, images of violence and ugliness, parts of myself I was sure I didn't want to face. Images of Rain, the periodic bystander who might have had a corona pollentia. We had no other choice. This was going to be one hell of a mess. Ooh, all right. 2 chapters. Nice. Cool. Alrighty. Let me get that saved. This was infrared. Yes, okay, so 19.1 infrared. Okay. Cool. Saved. Alrighty. Well, that is going to be it for me today. I need to clean these recordings up a little bit, get them finalized and posted up for my editors. But I won't make you all sit through that because it's boring. So that's it for now. I will likely be streaming again tomorrow. So thank you, Farm, for stopping in and saying hi. Thank you, anybody else who happens to be watching. And I will see you next time. Later.